April 5th, 1531. The sky was gray over London, almost as if nature could feel the horror about to happen. A crowd gathered at Smithfield, the usual spot for executions and livestock sales. But today was different. In the center of the square, an enormous bronze cauldron sat on a blazing fire, crackling as the water heated up. The crowd murmured when the guards brought out a tied-up man. His name was Richard Rose, a cook who worked for Bishop John Fisher. His pale face showed just how terrified he was as he faced the dreadful way he was about to die. Soon he would be boiled alive, feeling every bit of his skin slowly dissolve in the scalding water. But how did a mere cook end up with such a grim fate? To understand this twisted tale, we need to rewind a few weeks. It was February 1531, a chaotic time in England. King Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon so he could marry Anne Boleyn. This decision split the kingdom in two. On one side were the ambitious supporters of the king, and on the other were the conservative clerics who believed in the sanctity of marriage. Among the latter was Bishop John Fisher of Rochester, one of the king's strongest opponents. Fisher, a deeply religious man, had earned the hatred of not just Henry VIII, but also the Boleyn family, who saw him as a hurdle in their plans. The bishop lived in fear, constantly anxious. He moved from room to room each night and was extra careful with his food and drink, worried about an attempt on his life. And as we will see, his paranoia was not unfounded. At his residence in Lambeth, south of London, Fisher employed a staff of servants, including Richard Rose, his cook. Rose wasn't anything special, just a middle-aged man blending in with the other servants. He was discreet and efficient, never raising suspicion until that fateful day on February 18th. That afternoon, Fisher hosted a meal for guests. The menu featured a thick soup, a staple of English meals back then. Rose prepared the broth as usual, but secretly added a powder to the mix. Later, he would claim it was just a joke, thinking it harmless. There was a soup served that had a little something extra thrown in, a purgative that would upset your stomach. It was a cruel joke, but not deadly. The bishop, however, didn't eat much of it. Not out of suspicion, but maybe just because he wasn't hungry. Other guests dug in and finished theirs, though. By the end of the meal, the leftovers were given away, as was the custom to beggars looking for a meal. Among these were Bennet Kerwin and Alice Triet. They were two simple folks who could hardly believe their luck in getting hot food from a bishop's kitchen. But hours later, things took a turn for the dark. Those who had eaten the soup started feeling horrible. They suffered from intense stomach pains, vomiting, cold sweats, and even convulsions. Pfizer was lucky. He barely touched the toxic soup. But Bennet and Alice, who had eagerly enjoyed every bite, weren't so fortunate. Their bodies were discovered the next day, twisted in pain. News of the poisoning spread like wildfire. Henry VIII himself was furious upon hearing what happened. Though Pfizer was his political enemy, an attack like this shook the very foundations of the monarchy. If bishops could be poisoned, what would stop anyone from targeting the king? So, Henry ordered an immediate investigation. Richard Rose was caught trying to escape London and taken to the Tower. There they tortured him on the rack, stretching his limbs nearly to breaking. Under tremendous pain, he admitted to putting the powder in the soup, but claimed he didn't know it was deadly. He thought it was just meant to cause some discomfort. In an unusual turn, the case didn't go through the normal legal steps. On February 28th, Henry VIII appeared before Parliament himself to discuss the crime. This was something rare for that time. The king called the poisoning an act of high treason, not just against Bishop Pfizer, but against the crown itself. Parliament, always eager to please the king, quickly passed the law that made poisoning a treasonable offense, with the punishment being death by boiling. This detail is important. Henry VIII not only declared Rose guilty without a trial, but he also created a new law just to make an example of him. Treason was already a terrible charge, and the consequences were severe. Dragged by horses, hanged until he was nearly dead, castrated, then quartered alive. Yet the king craved something more. He wanted a punishment that matched the horror of poisoning, one that would make the criminal feel his body slowly cooking. Why such brutality? Why did the king get so involved in a case that just involved a cook and a bishop who wasn't even on his side? Motives were unclear. Some historians believe Henry VIII had a deep fear of poisoning, seeing it as a cowardly way to die, not even fitting for his enemies. Others think it had to do with complicated political reasons. The ambassador Eustace Chapu, who was close to Queen Catherine, hinted that the king might have acted out of desperation to deflect suspicions away from himself, or even from Anne Boleyn and her father. This theory isn't baseless. Rumors spread quickly after the poisoning, claiming that the Boleyn family hired the cook to eliminate one of Henry's biggest obstacles to marrying Anne. Richard Rose's quick and public execution could easily stop further investigations that might link back to the king. Whatever the truth, Rose's fate was decided. His execution was scheduled for April 5th, an unusual event that drew in crowds. People jostled for the best view, while street vendors hawked food and drinks, treating this like a show rather than the appalling death of a man. The enormous bronze cauldron was already bubbling when Rose was brought out. Some say he was given alcohol, a last mercy for someone about to face a cruel end. Guards stripped him and lifted him over the cauldron. A priest said a quick prayer, offering forgiveness but no comfort for his body. What happened next is one of the most horrifying executions in English history. 3 times they dipped Rose into the boiling water. The first time, only his legs went in. His screams echoed through the square as the skin peeled from his flesh. Some in the crowd fainted, others turned away in shock. On the second dip, his torso went under, and the previously clear water turned a pinkish color as it dissolved his flesh. His flesh twisted, and his screams turned into garbled gasps as he fought for air. With the third and final dip, Richard Roose was fully submerged in the boiling water. Death, though terrible, finally freed him from this agony. Roose's fate wasn't unique. Because of a new law, anyone convicted of poisoning faced the same end. In 1542, a woman named Margaret Davies was boiled alive at Smithfield for supposedly poisoning 3 families she worked for. This method of execution wasn't officially banned until Edward VI's reign, son of Henry VIII, as part of reforms to curb the most brutal punishments. What makes Richard Roose's story particularly chilling isn't just the cruelty of his execution, but the political turmoil of the time. He fell victim during a chaotic period when England was on the brink of major religious and political shifts. John Pfizer, the man Roose was accused of trying to kill, wouldn't escape his own grim fate. 4 years later, in 1535, Pfizer was executed for refusing to accept Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England. His severed head was displayed on London Bridge until it became unrecognizable, only to be replaced by that of Thomas More, another dissenter facing the same fate. Anne Boleyn, whose rise was linked to Roos's case, also faced a tragic end. In 1536, just 5 years later, she was executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, all seen as false claims to enable Henry to marry Jane Seymour. As for Henry VIII, he would continue his stormy reign for another 16 years, marrying 4 more times, breaking away from Rome, and turning England Protestant. His paranoia and brutality only grew with time, leaving a bloody mark on English history. Today, the place where Richard Roos met his dreadful end is a bustling commercial area, with no memorial to acknowledge the horrors that once took place there. Most Londoners passing through Smithfield are unaware that beneath their feet lies the spot where a man was slowly boiled alive in a bronze cauldron. Richard Roos's story gives us a disturbing look into a past where justice and cruelty were intertwined, a time when the powerful could literally take life as they pleased. Laws can be twisted to fit anyone's desires, and when the value of a person's life is reduced to how useful their death is for politics, it's hard to say if Roos was really guilty. Was he just a scapegoat to hide a bigger scheme? Or did he simply make a terrible mistake by adding some unknown stuff to his master's food? What we do know is that his punishment was far beyond any idea of justice, even by the harsh standards of that day. Executed by boiling. That's a death that's almost like cooking. There's a dark irony here. A man whose job was about preparing food ended up as an ingredient himself. This punishment wasn't just about getting rid of a criminal. No, it was a twisted form of revenge, aimed to satisfy a brutal sense of justice from another time. It's been 5 centuries since that grim April day in Smithfield. The world has changed in ways that Henry VIII and his pals could hardly dream of. Our justice systems, though not perfect, lean more towards helping people than punishing them. Laws are meant to be fair, applied equally to the rich and the poor. Even the worst crimes these days don't involve outright torture. Yet the story of Richard Roos, the man boiled alive, still captivates us. It shows just how fragile the line is between civilization and savagery. It reminds us how institutions that should protect us can easily turn into tools of terror when those in power misuse them. Under the bustling feet of today's Londoners, the echoes of that past still linger. If we listen closely, we might still hear the screams of a cook who, on a dreary April day back in 1531, learned the harsh truth of what it means to be on the wrong side of the cauldron.